welcome. Should we do a quick round of introductions? James.
Yeah, so I'm James Ashton, CEO of a Metaverse startup called Vegas City. I say startup, we've probably been in the space for about 5 years, so we're kind of been there since the beginning of Decentralized, and we were sort of created in their minting event, and we have done a lot of Metaverse projects, including casinos, including sports activations, and we're sort of deep into Decentraland, but also in the wider NFT space as well.
Cool. Corey.
Hey, everyone. Corey, Padveen, I'm a partner at T2 Marketing. We do a lot of traditional marketing, but in the last few years, with our tech arm, which is heavily focused on blockchain, we've been doing a lot more consulting on brands and growth strategies related to Web3, the Metaverse, and how they can sort of start to navigate that for business purposes.
Taylor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Taylor. I'm a co-founder of a company called Axon Park, which is building Metaverse infrastructure for learning. And I got into virtual reality back in 2014, and then started experimenting with social VR education at MIT and around 2018, teaching classes live in VR environments. And since then, just really exploring how we can effectively transform education using interactive media.
Cool. Joshua.
So I'm at the University of Malta, and we started a master's in blockchain a while ago, and it's a multidisciplinary master's, which differs a bit from the rest of the world. So we've been heavily involved in education, but I was also the chair of the national regulator in charge of regulating the technology, not the crypto, and I would say that about sums me up for now.
Perfect. All right, that's great. So there's a real kind of breadth of knowledge here in terms of the space and in terms of the metaverse in particular. So I think because this is the first session of the day, it'd be really good to kind of explore some of maybe the fundamentals of what the hell is a metaverse, right? Is Roblox a metaverse, right? I mean, Roblox is something that for those of you who've got kids, you'll be very familiar with, and drives huge numbers of players. But is that a metaverse, or is something like Decentraland a metaverse? What's the difference? Taylor, do you want to take a first stab at that?
Sure, yeah. It's actually funny that you mentioned Roblox. We had a little internal debate on this. So if you think about sort of how people define the metaverse, there's also like a vernacular issue, because basically a lot of people are saying the metaverse is like the internet. So you could replace the word internet with metaverse. So you wouldn't actually say the metaverse of education, because that would be like the internet of education. You'd say something which has yet to be defined. Some people call it meta-galaxies, some people call it verses. But basically the metaverse is this overarching structure that's the three-dimensional spatial internet, next generation of the internet. And so the way that I like to think about it is anything that's a spatial, interactive, three-dimensional world that's interactive and social has the properties of the metaverse in the same way that you would have right now applications that are native or online on the web. They're all connected to the internet, but they're not all the internet, if that makes sense. So it's kind of this ambiguous term that's still being defined, but that's generally how I would think about it. So Roblox, Decentraland, a lot of these applications have properties that would tie them into the metaverse.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to keep in mind too is that metaverse is just a term from a book, right? It appeared in Snow Crash, and we've just sort of taken that as gospel. But it's just a term out there. So the actual structure is what's to come. And I think we'll talk more about this. I'm sure there's going to be a conversation. But the key really is, does it actually connect through? It's a question of interoperability before you actually look at it as a comprehensive metaverse or universe. So I think that's really something that that we're working towards. But the term itself is, I think it's just too broad of a term to really nail it down in one definition.
So people think of like a virtual world, and when we started in Decentraland, we were meeting all of these virtual world OGs from Second Life who'd been doing it for a decade before us, and yet now you could easily term Second Life as a metaverse.
Yeah.
In the modern term. So.
Just 10 years ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Or more.
Or more.
More. 15. Yeah. A long time ago. Joshua, anything to add? No? Okay.
Nothing really. I mean, I would just say it's ambiguous, and it's the next, not version of the internet, it's internet plus whatever, but it's this internet that reaches out into the real world, where you have AR, you have VR, and all sorts of other worlds. But we don't exactly know how to define it.
And just touching on that kind of VR, AR, kind of what I call flat screen 3D environments. I mean, I think a lot of people think about it as virtual reality, right? And actually, when they see, particularly, I guess, the flat screen 3D environments and the more decentralized ones, they often turn around and say, what does this look like a 1990s game?
Right.
So why is that? What's the discrepancy there? What's holding it back?
I think one of the things is it's an open infrastructure. If we compare the early days of the web to the applications that were around at the same time, the web looked very, very basic indeed, and that was because it was like, breaking new boundaries in the delivery of that. So, and I think as we move forwards with the metaverses, we'll see that some are actually kind of delivery agnostic. So, taking the case of Decentraland, for example, there are different versions of the client out there. You've got the browser version, it's now released on Mac and PC. There's a VR version in alpha. Maybe the next version's an Unreal Engine version, or maybe it's like an 8-bit, top-down 2D graphics version. It's still a manifestation of the same thing, just different, like a browser's viewing it.
So the reality is the metaverse is multiple and can be delivered in multiple different visual formats.
Well, I think it's important to note, if you're looking at trying to nail down a definition, then you can sort of give the graphics a break. If we don't really know what it is, how can we expect to look at it like it's 4K? So, and I think that's part of what we're trying to figure out here is how is this going to work as a bridge between the real world that we're in right now and some sort of a digital world that is that you can transcend, but also have some sort of practical use for. That extends beyond just a computer screen. But until then, we're talking, this is actually timing-wise really nice because yesterday was Google's 23rd anniversary. And I think that sort of speaks to, you look at some of the pages from Google's first iteration and it doesn't look great. And that's sort of where we are right now is, the very first iteration, or maybe second if you look at Second Life or some of these applications in the past, but the first iteration of some sort of a large-scale interconnected metaverse.
Cool. Okay. And just so touching on this kind of interconnected, because this is another topic that often comes up and I think kind of confuses people. What's the difference? Often the terms are used kind of open and closed metaverses, or centralized versus decentralized. So again, you might take Decentraland versus Meta. Can we kind of demystify that a little bit for the audience?
Just on one thing in terms of Decentraland and the other Web3 metaverses is that they're pretty much permissionless, like something like Bitcoin, in that if you own the virtual land, then only you can control what's deployed onto it. So, in essence, it's like the web. Anyone can spin up a server and deploy content, and they don't need someone's permission to do that. And I think that's not how Meta will be. Meta, you will have to go and get permission and go through possibly like an Apple-like curation process to get in there.
So the owning the land in that instance is your ticket into that metaverse, and the land is predicated on a smart contract. So the smart contract acts a bit, I guess, like in real life. You've got a lease on a building, and then you can do what you want with that building.
Yes.
I would almost think of it as a spectrum because something like Decentraland is a great example of something that really is much more on the open side, but then it's not just like open and closed. There's a full spectrum in between because there might be some areas that are open. For example, identity, right? If you have an avatar and an identity system with information attached to it that you want to take between these different platforms, that might be open, right? You might have that ability. But to be able to spin up a piece of land and publish your own content onto the platform, that might be permissionless or permissioned. So again, these terms are very like broad, black and white sweeping. It really is a spectrum, and I think that's what's going to be interesting, because right now a lot of people are pushing identity to be very interoperable, so that you create your avatar, your data, so you're a sovereign individual, you own your data, any data that you generate, you can imagine like a shield around you, and you can allow people to plug into your shield and pull your data. I think that would be something that people will push for, that will be really valuable to people and help them actually offset cost, because it's just so extractive right now. So I think you'll see, again, these little components that make up something that tilts closed or tilts open.
Yeah, I would add on to that. So like Corey said before, we have to look at the technology as many different components. It's not the metaverse. And as well, when it comes to decentralization, it's not decentralized or not. It's a spectrum of decentralization. I mean, even if we were to look at Decentraland, the smart contracts are decentralized. And if you interact with them directly, it's decentralized. If you're actually using Decentraland, though, you're speaking to a centralized server coming from a DNS that is centralized, speaking to a centralized platform. They can decide to remove the smart contracts and just have a server behind it. So there are elements of trust, and I think it's important, not saying that it's not decentralized. Sometimes points of trust are perfectly fine. And it's about figuring out which ones are and which ones aren't, because that impacts the components then. This is why the graphics are terrible on these things, because decentralization is slow. So we need to figure out what to centralize for efficiency, what to decentralize for trust.
And I think that's a really good point about decentralization, is that total decentralization right now, as it stands, is just not something that's possible. I mean, there's so much that we rely on that, and for the development side. I mean, eventually that's what you may be looking to get, but where we are right now, there's a fully decentralized just means turning everything off, because nothing can right now work when it's entirely decentralized.
If there are any Bitcoin maxis in here,
I was going to say,
you might get offended. Not even Bitcoin is completely decentralized. I mean, you have hard-coded IPs in there, DNS servers, the repository, and that's perfectly fine. We need to just understand what to centralize, what to decentralize.
One of the things just to add is that a very well decentralized project is capable of being forked, and it's capable of honoring any part of the original.
Indeed.
So whether it's a Bitcoin versus Bitcoin Cash, or a Bitcoin versus a Litecoin, I would imagine a sandbox, but I definitely see, Decentraland is all open source. Indeed. So if the foundation goes awry and starts getting too controlling, someone's just going to spin up the same tech stack.
But on that,
and so see you later.
on that point, then the question is, how decentralized is the vote that we take as a people? I mean, we've seen one community, one person says we're doing X, everyone did it. Is that really decentralization?
Yeah, this is moving into kind of DAOs, right? Yeah. And actually, how decentralized is that, and are there groups who are kind of skewing the votes? Maybe we'll touch on that later. So just to finish on this kind of definitions, we're kind of saying the blockchain is a parallel technology that can be very complementary to metaverses, but it's not a prerequisite necessarily.
No, and it has nothing to do with the delivery of the metaverse. It's potentially used for, permissions. It could also be used for the interoperability of identity. A collection of NFTs could be the manifestation of a person's identity.
But
this panel, I'm assuming, is fairly bullish on decentralized, blockchain technology within metaverse.
Yeah, I think from James' point, the scalability, the interoperability question, and I think the scalability questions are two that you sort of are big ones, and that a good answer, or one possible answer, would be building it out on a blockchain.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at Meta, and I think that was the question that we ignored, Meta is focusing on this completely centralized platform.
Yeah.
They're open about it. That's where they make their money from. But it's going to be faster. Are the people out there going to care about whether they're using a decentralized platform or a centralized one? A bunch of us will in the crypto space. Many people won't. So I think there's these social issues that we need to see how decentralized we need to be. And maybe you can have decentralized platforms working around a decentralized platform. I mean, those are the big questions.
Interesting.
You can look at the generation who are playing Roblox as well. Anyone who's got kids playing Roblox knows how important digital assets are to them. And as they grow up, ownership of those digital assets will become crucial, because they'll experience some centralized ones falling by the wayside, and they'll lose their shit.
Yeah, I definitely think that now that the world has been exposed to blockchain technology, it's kind of like we've seen the light. There's no turning back at this point. So it just will be embedded in any next generation technology that we create. So it's, like you said, it's not dependent on blockchain to have a metaverse infrastructure. It's one of maybe 7 core components, along with compute, networking, platforms, other tools. So, but it's very likely that along with artificial intelligence and all the other emergent technologies, that it will all play together.
And in terms of this discrepancy between, you look at Roblox numbers, I think they've got over 50 million daily active users, and then in Decentraland and Sandbox, the number is infinitesimal compared to that. What is it that these kind of decentralized metaverses need to do? I mean, technology-wise, user experience, education, what's going to make the difference, and what kind of timeframes do we think we're talking about?
Well, I think for one, there's not really much of a use case right now outside of projects. So there isn't. You don't have a community aspect. You don't really have much in the way of similar use cases for people who are using it. I mean, we've worked on projects with people who are doing. We have one that's attempting to build out a real estate project using assets within the metaverse, and we have another one that's just trying to sit on property in case it's worth something. So the lots of land are and the tokens that and the access to it. There isn't really much uniformity in how it's being used, and I think that until you really start to scale up a user base, and not to mention that, if you're looking for something that is metaverse-like, there are options out there that are, like Roblox as an example. So I think that it's a question of finding some sort of commonality among the users before you start to see this mass adoption. Because right now, you have a novelty of it. If you know what the Gartner hype cycle is, you'll know that right now we're in this apex of excitement, which is teetering off, and eventually you'll find yourself in what's called the valley of disillusionment, where nobody is going to really care much for it, which is when you really allow for developers and programmers to take their time and build it right. So I think once that's when you're going to start to see some real value, is when you let the people who know what they're doing take control and start doing something.
Also, the sort of celebrity scene is very cautious. They're all dipping their toe in, but they don't dip in full on. They don't go.
Right.
They don't tweet saying, "I'm now in the metaverse. Please click here to jump in." They skirt around it, and that means that you see these big names in, but they're not like putting their machine into top gear. They're putting it into first gear. So last year we had the Metaverse Festival, which was in Decentraland. It was a public access event. It had some stars like Deadmau5 performing, and the user count of Decentraland went up exponentially for a little while after that event. So I do think that there will be these moments in the metaverse where all of a sudden a light is shone on it, and in Decentraland we have a festival coming up in November. There's some big names lined up. Maybe that will be another ramp up in the world of Decentraland. And I think all of these. I think some of the centralized metaverses, and even something like Fortnite, it had its marshmallow moment where it was suddenly on the world's media in a festival situation, and the user numbers of Fortnite just rocketed after that. Yeah. So I think we'll see the same type of pattern.
Yeah. And I think ultimately it's a matter of time. I mean, the tech is, at least if we're talking about the decentralized tech, it's not there. My mom, maybe my mom's not going to go in the metaverse, but young kids are not going to install MetaMask. They have no idea what crypto is, at least not yet. So it's either a matter of time until they get educated, or a matter of time until the tools get there, allowing them to do it easily. And then if it's centralized versus decentralized, funnily, actually, the centralized platforms could be their own demise. I mean, Instagram, Twitter, all the big guys, they're allowing you to use NFTs. What happens when they stop you from using an NFT because it's offensive? Or then people may say, yeah, we don't want that. So it's just a matter of time, and it's going to take, I don't want to put a time on it. I don't want to look silly and invest time.
Yeah, you went to the prediction session this morning. This is just talking nonsense.
We'll save the predictions for later. Okay, cool. So I touched on the intro, different industries who are dipping their toe in, let's say, into the space. Have Any kind of experiences on the panel in terms of working with those brands or those industries, and what they're doing and why they're doing it?
We've got quite a lot of brand experience because we've been doing a lot of brand activations in different sectors. We've recently seen a flurry of alcohol brands come in, and we've done ones with Grey Goose and Jose Cuervo and Patron Tequila, and they're doing it for a marketing opportunity. They're doing it so they can tweet out their images of their brand in the metaverse. And they buy into things like having a branded wearables so that like avatars are running around wearing their adverts. So that's one example. Another example is sport. So sport are actually, sport is probably one of the more ambitious ones. Like we did the Melbourne Cup last year. So we actually live streamed the live Melbourne Cup into the metaverse. And, people, were socializing and watching it. There was a game they could play while the race was on. It was a different experience, and people actually loved it. So there are people not just doing it for the marketing opportunity, they're doing it for the experience. And these brands are getting bigger and bigger. So the big one coming into what we're doing is La Liga, the Spanish football league. So for them, we're creating a stadium, and that stadium will have not just exposure to the sport, it will have all other experiences. So it is very much going to appeal to the Roblox kind of sort of user sort of count, because it would have the same type of mini games in there. So these are the sorts of things that brands can do, and I suppose that it's moving away from the kind of the early brand activations all were very formulaic. Run around a space, collect some things, get a prize for collecting them. So now it's coming into sort of like a game of skill. So, actually, dare I say, you'll be able to kick a football around in the La Liga stadium.
Just make sure there's no kids around you when you're doing it.
So in terms of where it is now, irrefutably, gaming is the primary driver. That's where you're seeing Fortnite, 12.3 million concurrent people at one time attending a virtual concert and then going and continuing to play Fortnite. So really gaming entertainment is right now by far the biggest sector. But what's been interesting is also looking at some of the research that's been conducted. So World Economic Forum just conducted a survey of 21,000 people across 29 countries, and they asked them, what are the areas that you're most excited for with the metaverse? How do you think it will change the world as we know it the most? And education was actually right at the top. It was the number one thing, which I was very excited to see. And so it's just interesting thinking about utility. I know people talk a lot about utility, but it's like, why would we go and put on a headset or log into this world that has a lot of friction relative to just popping open an app? Because utility. So if you think about your day, you've got work time, you've got fitness time, you've got entertainment time, you've got learning time. So if you can find use cases that actually play into the common structure of your day. So for example, fitness is actually huge. Like there's a virtual fitness company. They pivoted after like 4 or 5 years of exploring different entertainment things. They pivoted into building this app called Supernatural that some of you may have heard of. They got acquired for $400 million. And now there's actually an antitrust lawsuit coming against it because they're so big. So I think we'll start to see these sort of core pillars of our lives start to get filled up where it's like you have to log in because you have to take a meeting for work. You have to log in because you have to attend a lecture.
Can you talk a little bit more about the education piece? How does that manifest itself? Is it people going to lectures? Is it more hands-on? How do you see that kind of manifesting?
It's all over the board. So like for context, I've experimented with social VR. So as I was mentioning, I taught a class at the MIT Media Lab where I was in Los Angeles in my living room in VR, and then students were in 2 different buildings in Cambridge, and we were all in this virtual classroom together in the most ridiculous avatars, by the way. This was actually the platform High Fidelity that Philip Rosedale, the creator of Second Life, created after Second Life. So he was just way too early with it. So it's kind of pivoted. So you've got these social experiences where you're live with other people. You have embodied presence where you feel like you're in the same space with other people. And then you've got sort of what we call like asynchronous, we call it AI guided or self-guided training, where you're going through an experience. It's procedural, so VR is very good for procedural training because you can go step by step by step. It can guide you through, like if you're learning how to repair a wind turbine, for example, like that's very dangerous and costly to do in real life. But in virtual reality, you can go in, you can be standing hundreds of feet, above the ground, fixing this massive structure and getting that practice. Or a good example is a gas truck that's on fire, how to respond if, you have a fire emergency with a gas truck. So you've got sort of this whole spectrum, and VR training is actually one of the largest use cases for VR, and it's the most, I believe, like the clearest utility for it right now, because you can just simulate situations that would be really dangerous or expensive or prohibitive in other ways. So it's just basically every industry is now experimenting with.
Well, I mean, look at, and I think that you could tie that back to what's probably the first use case from utility, which is Microsoft Flight Simulator. I mean, that's still a gold standard for training, and it's, I mean, it takes, huge amount of computing power, but that sort of has been, that's lasted a test of time and has just gotten better, but it continues to be a crucial piece for training, because you're not going to send somebody up in a jet or a plane without giving them some training here. I mean, if you expand that out to anything, and then you put that into a classroom education example, you're talking about, teaching kids how to do stuff, but where you have integrated hints, where you have AI that can identify where there's someone, where they're getting stuck, and build out courses specifically for students that to help them with something in a given area, which also takes a burden off of teachers when you're talking about a lot of the workload can be eased with AI. So
one thing I just want to make sure I don't forget to mention is that you can also give people perspectives that they could never have in real life.
Yeah.
And so, for example, if you're learning about quantum mechanics, why not get down to a quantum scale? If you're learning about chemistry, why not experience a chemical reaction at a 1,000th or a 10,000th of a human scale? So you can actually put yourself into these scenarios, which I'm really excited about, and it's kind of a controversial idea, but like extended immersion in these worlds where you spend 50 hours in a world where you're experiencing quantum mechanics at a fundamental level, how you would learn that and embody that information. So I think that's a whole other area that is vastly underexplored and really exciting.
Yeah, and I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, but probably the simulated environment is great for some things, but it might not be great for other things. And I think this is really where the next version of the metaverse comes into play, where we have some sort of AR glasses, and you're actually doing a live surgery then, and you have some indicators shifting you from the simulated environment into the real environment. And then you might be walking in the street using your glasses, and this is where Meta or someone else comes in, and you see an advert for the best surgeon tools. So this is really where we start to get into this metaverse, this wrapper around the universe.
And there's
Fascinating.
also just like the people doing it in the metaverse. So the University of Hong Kong are in Decentralized, and they ran induction training for actual students about a year ago, and the area around it's developed. You can now walk out of the University of Hong Kong's replica of their School of Medicine, and there's a career centre across the road. So, at a basic level, there's a lot of opportunity.
But I mean, you see examples of it already with heads-up displays in vehicles. Jaguar's entire new heads-up display is built around that very concept, where it'll tell you about accidents, it'll tell you about delays, it'll show you where there's parking, and it'll give you an ad for a nearby gas station or something like that. So, the actual applications of it do exist. But again, these are all on an individual basis. If you want to look at scaling this up, then that's where the technology really comes into play.
Yeah, yeah. And so just bringing this back a little bit into gambling.
Oh, right.
What are we seeing, at the moment from the gambling industry, do we think, in terms of the use of this technology? Are we seeing a similar kind of appetite for, like we're seeing with the fashion industry, or is this, much more controlled or less? And why is that? Is it regulation? Is it just a lack of appetite?
I think I'll mention this because I'm sure, James, you have a few examples on your end, but I know that with a lot of the traditional brick and mortar operators and some of the licensed operators that we work with on a regular basis, they're really interested. But the question is, how do they balance this with licensing issues, especially in North America, where gaming licenses are fickle, and it takes one mistake to lose one. So, you don't have publicly traded multi-billion-dollar companies that are going to take this lightly and just try it. It's a much easier process when you're talking about consumer packaged goods because they can run these sort of campaigns, but initiatives like this are being looked at. I know we're doing a few write-ups for clients in the space, but it's you're looking at a much longer timeline because there can't be any mistakes. There can't be any question as to how this works from a legality standpoint. What happens if you have an ad for MGM in front of a 6-year-old? That's not good.
But does it stop, a regulated gambling operator with a regulated product, web product? Is that not kind of migratable into the metaverse and still is a regulated product, right? You're KYCing, you know who your customer is, you've got all of those kind of protections in place.
Yeah, 100%, because basically, we've actually got quite a lot of experience in the gaming space. There's a bunch of casinos that you can rock up to and play. And, none are real money gambling right now in the conventional sense of the word. There was one operator who dipped their toe into that space about a year ago. You could literally just walk into a casino in, let's call it the Wild West casino, and you could just literally run up and start betting Mana or Ethereum or US dollar coin on a roulette table, and it was seamless, and it was a glimpse into how the future will be once the regulations are done. But for now, one of the approaches which is being, the projects we're currently working on, it's about building a front end onto an existing infrastructure. So it's not about, trying to have an anonymous Web3, type of setup. It's about providing a front end for people to access their existing account, balance, adhere to the checks they already currently do, but then to experience that in a 3D environment. And on a web-based metaverse, that becomes quite straightforward because you're in the fabric of the web. You can drop users out into a KYC check and maintain their session, and then expire that session just like you would on a regular website. So I do think that we're now seeing like a bit of a rush of casinos who have realised this, that if they don't try and go beyond their existing regulatory boundaries, then they can make it happen, and that might mean geo-blocking people from certain jurisdictions where they don't have a license.
So that could be a phase one. I mean, I guess phase one could just be experiential, play money.
Well, yeah, I think
marketing,
James is right. That looking at it like an extension as opposed to a reinvention. So I think that because you're not going to necessarily, unless you have independent operators that can start to venture into some crypto, you'll have a lot more flexibility with that in Europe than you will in North America, at least for now.
Yeah.
But I agree. It's going to be a process to make sure that if you're licensed, you want to make sure that you can't screw that up by trying something new.
And I think I think the Brave will try and walk that hand in hand with the regulators. Because the regulators need people to work with because they need to regulate the situation. Exactly. Unless they have that, then they're going to find what was happening in gambling in the early days of the web, where it was a huge game of cat and mouse that's still going on today.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the biggest challenge is, so when it comes to gaming regulation, definitely, but the biggest challenge is being compliant with financial asset regulation, which doesn't exist in a lot of jurisdictions. And it's not like credit cards where you receive the money, you get euro in your account, your denomination. You have crypto that it can be used anywhere without you even knowing it. So I think those are the biggest challenges, to not run into it without having legal certainty at this point, I would say.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So we're just drawing to a close. So I just want to ask 2 quick questions. When's the right time to invest? And what's the metaverse going to look like in 5 years' time? James?
Well, you could argue that in terms of the Web3 metaverse, we're at the bottom. So now, would be my answer.
And in 5 years, where do you know Decentraland obviously very intimately? What will Decentraland look like?
Well, I think Decentraland will have different rendering engines. That's absolutely certain. Architecturally, it's already there. They already exist. So we can expect to see sort of some one-upping of different metaverse fidelities, shall we say. So there's no reason why there isn't going to be one day soon an Unreal Engine version of Decentraland.
Okay.
So I think we'll just see a I see that we'll probably, in 5 years, metaverses visually will probably look like where gaming is today. And obviously, gaming will be at another level by then, as in arcade gaming,
Yeah.
not gambling gaming.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Corey.
Well, as far as investment goes, yeah, I would agree with James. If you didn't before, then you could do it now. It's kind of like you didn't miss out much on in the last 6 months since you're back at square one. But as far as investments in the metaverse, I mean, I think that there's not much that you could do outside of make the investment for future proofing whatever it is that you're doing right now. As far as 5 years from now, I think you're going to see a lot more rapid movement in Meta's closed metaverse before you see some of the more open ones really taking off, and that's just because they've got 9 figures tied to that taking off. So within 5 years, you'll probably see Meta transform itself into a metaverse first company, which they kind of already have. But I think the development side, it'll get there within the next 5 years. Otherwise, they're in a lot of trouble.
Taylor?
I definitely echo the sentiment on investment timing. I would just say look for things that have real utility, like try to understand the fundamentals of what you're investing in and how it plays into the bigger picture, and find things that actually truly have utility instead of just hype and good Telegram communities. So that's on the investment side. In terms of 5 years, predictions are always challenging, but I'd say you'll definitely have improved rendering. So there's like pixel streaming is a technology that's becoming more accessible. So you basically render the 3D world on a server somewhere else, and then you stream that to the device. So you don't need a super powerful device to have these beautiful, huge worlds. So I think that will proliferate. I think you'll also see, again, those tentpole categories, things like fitness, work, education, start to really become more and more mainstream. And then you'll have probably the 3 iterations of hardware from now with headsets. So you'll have more than 4K per eye. You'll get closer to 8K per eye, which means clear legibility for reading, basically no screen door effects. So you'll be able to sit in a headset, maybe 200 grams for the headset, where you can actually sit there for hours and hours all day. You'll have good mixed reality systems. So you'll just see increased prolonged usage and more of that blending of the physical and digital throughout all of our day.
And Joshua, just quickly, I'm
Yep.
afraid.
So I would, first of all, not financial advice, but I would say if you're looking to invest money, personally, I think now is not the time to invest in anything because it's going to crash further. But if you're looking to build products, then now is definitely the time to build for the metaverse because some shape or form it's going to take off. And besides that, in 5 years' time, I think we would have a better idea of what we believe the metaverse is, which is a mix of centralization and decentralization.
Thank you.
Maybe a definition by then.
Maybe.
Tune in 5 years from now.
Next year, maybe we'll aim for that. I'd like to just extend my thanks to the panelists. Thank you.